She's back. After a few months on podcast hiatus, I am really happy to be back behind the mic recording again. And if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you might have noticed that the last episode of season 3 dropped back sometime in December of 2025. And that pause was actually intentional. At the start of 2026, I took the first few months of the year to slow down, gather insights, and really think about what I wanted the next chapter of this podcast, and quite frankly, the next chapter of my life and work to look like. So today, we are kicking off what I am calling the spring installment of season 3 of this podcast. Not to sound all woo woo, but spring is technically a season of renewal. It's the moment when the things you planted from before begin to reemerge, and that felt like the right moment to return and start sharing again on the podcast. Those of you who may be listening to this podcast for the first time, welcome. My name is Arlesha, and on this podcast, I share reflections, insights, and lessons around one central idea: how to harmonize your life and your ambitions, making capacity and space for all the things you're pursuing at the same time. It's not about balance because we know that does not exist, but what we do know, it's possible for ambition and living to coexist. A lot of what I talk about on this here podcast is inspired by my 15 plus year career in the sports and entertainment industry. For many of those years, I had the privilege of working with some of the greatest athletes of our generation. I spent nearly a decade working alongside three-time NBA champion Dwayne Wade on his management team, while also working at one of the most prestigious sports and entertainment talent agencies in the world, CAA. Later on, I worked with four-time NBA champion Steph Curry at his enterprise, SC30 Inc. And throughout those experiences, I wasn't just observing greatness on the court. I was learning firsthand what it looks like for high-performing individuals to pursue their ambitions with intention. And beyond athletes, I had the opportunity to also work with some incredible business executives and mentors who shaped how I think about ambition and how I approach my career with intentionality. My career lessons didn't just apply to the field of sports or business. They apply to life, and that's what this podcast is really about. Today, I'm coming to you not only with those past experiences, but also from a new chapter of my own. These days, I'm living in my 2.0 era. I'm an entrepreneur. I founded a boutique strategic advisory called Champion Strategies, where I work with athletes and purpose driven founders and leaders who are building brands, businesses, and ventures rooted in intellectual property. So on this podcast, I get to blend those worlds together: lessons from sports, business, entrepreneurship, and my personal growth. And before we get into today's episode about making room for new ambitions, I do have a small favor to ask. If you've been listening to this podcast since the beginning, or if you're new here and are a new subscriber, I'd really appreciate if you downloaded this episode or follow the podcast wherever you are listening. What happens when a podcast goes on a hiatus is that sometimes the algorithms change and episodes don't automatically download like they used to. And you might not even get notified when new ones drop unless you're following the show. So if you've enjoyed this podcast, make sure you hit follow or subscribe. And if you want a little glimpse behind the scenes of the ideas that I'm thinking about as I'm working, the projects that I'm working on, or the reflections that eventually make their way into this podcast, you can find me primarily on LinkedIn and Threads, and occasionally on Instagram. I don't post every single day. I am not trying to flood your timeline, but those are the places where I tend to share the gems along the way. Also, this podcast is paired with my Substack newsletter, where I write longer reflections that expand on some of the ideas that you'll hear here on these episodes. So, if something resonates with you in this episode, chances are I will be exploring it over on my Substack as well. Okay, let's get to it. Let's get into the reason you clicked on this episode. You probably saw the title about making room for new ambitions. Over the first few weeks of 2026, I spent a lot of time doing something that many of us do around the start of a new year: planning, thinking about some new goals, new directions, ideas, and ambitions. I was thinking about where I want to take my business, the type of clients I want to work with, the projects I want to take on, and the areas of my life that I want to grow into. While I was doing all of that planning, I was adding more to the list than I was taking away. I realized that ambition isn't just about deciding what you want to pursue, it's about deciding what you're willing to make room for. And making room often requires letting something else go. We're very comfortable with the idea of setting goals, but we're not always as comfortable with the idea of clearing space. We set career goals, financial goals, health goals, but we rarely ask ourselves, what needs to shift in my life in order for this next ambition to actually have space? Ambition requires capacity. It requires time, energy, and attention. And if your life is already full, then every new ambition becomes something you try to squeeze in rather than something you can fully build. Over the past few weeks, I've been sitting with a question that I want to share with you today on this episode. If a new ambition is trying to enter your life, what needs to move in order to make room for it? That question led me to start developing this simple framework for myself. The framework is still evolving, but here's the essence of it. When a new ambition appears, or a new idea or pursuit you want to take on, you have to evaluate three things. Number one is what you keep. What you keep are the things in your life that are foundational. These are the relationships, the habits, and commitments that actually support who you're becoming. These are the things you protect. And then you have the second category, what to evolve. Some things in your life don't need to disappear, they just need to shift and evolve. Maybe that's a project that needs to change its objectives. Maybe it's a role that you took on that you need to scale down. Or maybe it's a commitment that evolves into something lighter that still keeps the relationship intact. Evolution is also about asking for help. If you can get more help on something, it gives you space to increase bandwidth for other things. And then there's the third category. Number three, the category is about releasing. What do I release? And this is often the hardest one. The things we hold on to, not because of alignment with where we're going, but because they were aligned with who we used to be. And that part requires honesty. Making room for a new chapter means acknowledging that a previous chapter has run its course. It doesn't mean everything has to change overnight, but it does mean that we have to be intentional about what we're carrying forward. I'm going to share a quick example. A few weeks ago, I took a discovery call for a potential project, and frankly, much of the project involved taking on work that looked too similar to my 1.0 of my career. My 1.0 of my career was about getting brand partnerships and endorsement deals for athletes, and while I'm more than capable for doing that work, right now in my 2.0, I'm really honing in and helping individuals develop their intellectual property, and architecting IP initiatives that will expand their brand and their businesses. While partnerships can be part of this work, the IP build out is the anchor of my services right now. 2.0 era of my career and life, my values are really around ownership, and all of the work that I take on has to follow that value and that theme. I actually did not proceed with this client for this specific scope, but we're in talks about aligning his efforts on some other things, and I'm excited about what those could look like. But that's an example of what it means to evolve, right? Think about what needs to evolve, what needs to shift, and what also needs to be released. Releasing my 1.0 for my 2.0, knowing that my career and the values around it and the work that aligns with that has evolved. For me personally, this season has been about identifying the ambitions that truly matter to me right now. Supporting people in their ownership journeys is where I can bring the most value, and making sure my focus is structured in a way that can actually support them. The 2.0 era that I'm in right now is not about chasing opportunities, but aligning with what matters most. And that's really what harmonizing life and ambition is all about. If you're going to set time towards something, make it matter and make it purposeful. It's not about doing everything. It's about doing the right things in the right seasons of your life. So as we move into the spring season together, I want to leave you with a question. Take a moment to think about the ambitions that are calling your attention right now, the ideas you keep coming back to, the direction you feel pulled toward, and ask yourself, what needs to stay in my life to support this? What might need to evolve? And what might need to be released to create the room for what's next? The biggest step toward a new ambition isn't the first action you take. It's about creating the space for that ambition to exist. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Hey, it's Arlesha. I'm really excited to be back for the spring installment of season 3. And I will be back next week with another conversation around life, ambition, and the lessons I'm learning along the way. Until then, keep harmonizing your life and your ambition.